guys, welcome back to my channel. This is episode 3 of Consumer Case Study, where I break down consumer apps and why they work. As someone who's been writing on this platform for nearly 2 years, today we're doing a deep dive on Substack. So let's begin. Picture the media industry in 2017. Craigslist is killing classified ads, Google and Facebook are eating up the majority of ad revenue, and social media is prioritizing clickbait over quality writing. And your average writer has no direct economic relationship with their readers. So 3 people stepped up in response to these issues: Chris Best, Hamish McKenzie, and Jairaj Sethi. Best and Sethi actually had just left Kick Messenger, which was an anonymous messaging platform, and McKenzie was an ex-journalist who had written for Tesla. Due to their frustration with centralized, algorithm-driven social media platforms, the trio conceived the driving idea behind Substack, which they began bootstrapping in 2017. Because of the aforementioned issues with the ad industry and writer-reader relationships, writers needed to own their audience rather than rent it from a platform whose algorithm could change overnight. It's actually quite simple. The app runs on a newsletter-based system with paywall infrastructure. So that means that writers can publish their work for free, but should they choose to turn on paid subscriptions, the platform will take a cut of their revenue. Writers also have full visibility and control of their subscriber list, and they can export that data anytime. However, just sending out newsletter emails has no native virality or discovery loop, and so Substack fixed this with 3 things. The first is recommendations, which they launched in 2022. This means that writers can recommend other newsletters to subscribers during the subscribe flow. Just 2 years after launch, recommendations along with the Substack app have powered a network driving 50% of all new subscriptions and generating more than 34 million subscriptions across the platform total. The second thing is notes, which, similar to X posts and Instagram threads, subscribe to a short form feed that layers on top of the newsletter product. This algorithm explicitly optimizes for subscriptions and paid conversions rather than time spent or engagement. The third thing is the actual Substack app. This eventually has surpassed recommendations as the single largest source of subscriber and revenue growth for publishers, after being the #1 source of all subscriptions on the platform. With recommendations, notes, and the app combined, Substack surpasses just an email tool to become a social discovery layer sitting on top of owned audience infrastructure. I think it's the rare case of a company that has successfully bolted network effects onto a fundamentally non-social product, which in this case is email. In the early days, Substack actually had a chicken and egg problem. So with no writers and no readers, neither subset of people had any reason to use their platform, right? So Substack Pro was an initiative where they would pay select high-profile writers up to 6 figures to spend their first year publishing on the platform. In exchange, Substack would keep 85% of that writer's subscription revenue during that advance year. Instead of waiting for organic breakout writers, they bought a handful of them outright to just prove that the model worked and to see the platform with content that is worth subscribing to. Obviously, this isn't without some controversy, but more on that later. Since then, Substack has grown exponentially to sit at 50 million active subscriptions, with 5 million being paid. In terms of retention, the average email open rate on Substack is 44%, which is nearly double the industry standard. And this is good. People aren't just subscribing and ghosting, they're actually reading. But if you go back a couple years, Substack's growth engine was recommendations, where writer recommends writer and the reader subscribes to both. This was peer-to-peer and there was no algorithm required for this, and that was originally the selling point. Now that the dominant growth channel has shifted to more of an algorithmic discovery surface of notes and the in-app feed, it's interesting because if you pair that observation with what Substack did with Substack Pro, you start to see a pattern. This is a company that's always been more willing to hand engineer its growth rather than we just built neutral infrastructure. Like I mentioned before, writers can publish their newsletters for free, but Substack will take a 10% cut of paid subscription revenue. On top of that, Stripe, the payment processor, takes its standard processing fee. So combined, writers typically see their gross revenue shrink by about 15%. The platform's entire business is essentially a tax on other people's success. I love how there are no ads, no data sales, no algorithm-driven engagement product to sell, but it also means that Substack's growth is directly tied to how much money that writers can extract from readers, not how much attention Substack itself can generate and monetize. In terms of funding, Substack has raised across 6 rounds since 2017, totaling somewhere between 190 and 200 million total. There are big names like A16Z, Bond, TCG, Rich Paul, Jens Greed. I found it interesting that in 2023, they opened a community round, which let writers and users buy small equity stakes in the platform itself. Then in July 2025, they closed their Series C, so 100 million raised and 1.1 billion valuation. Something worth noting about this is that they hit this unicorn status with only about 45 million in recurring revenue. For context, investors will usually look for revenue in the 100 to 150 million per year range to justify a valuation like that. So this raise, I think, was priced on the growth story. And the biggest vulnerability of this business model lies here. It depends on its top earners choosing to stick with the 90-10. Once a writer's audience is big enough, nothing is stopping them from taking their subscriber list and leaving the platform. So essentially, Substack becomes optional exactly at the moment a writer becomes valuable enough to matter to the platform's revenue. As I mentioned before, every app has its weaknesses, and for Substack, I think there are 3 worth mentioning. So the first one is extreme power law economics. You will hear about the 6-7 figure earners, but many of those writers often arrive with massive pre-existing audiences, and the median creator actually earns closer to $4,000 annually. And nearly 50% of creators with paid subscriptions earn less than $500 in 2025. Success on this platform isn't necessarily due to the platform itself, but rather a transfer of loyalty. I think this goes for a lot of other social platforms, but especially for Substack. This works fine for the platform, but not for the average user. The second thing is there's been a crisis on the extreme lack of content moderation. Substack has been notorious for refusing to moderate the publications on its platform, and there's nothing inherently bad about it, except for when it does become bad. In 2023, The Atlantic reported Nazi and white supremacist writers building monetized subscription businesses on Substack, and over 240 writers signed a petition demanding explanations. Substack initially refused to demonetize those newsletters, and as a result, several of its most prominent writers left the platform over it. Only under pressure did Substack remove 5 publications. There have been other cases, but this in particular exposed the tension between hands-off, writer owns everything, and the fact that recommendations and notes algorithmically amplify extremist content the same as any other platform. And the third thing is mission drift. As I mentioned before, Substack started as an anti-algorithm, pro-ownership platform that differentiated it from other social media platforms. Now they're leaning hard into notes and in-app algorithm as its main growth engine. Honestly, in this attention economy, who can blame them? But Substack increasingly looks and behaves like the very social media platforms that it critiqued at the start. If you made me a PM at Substack right here, right now, these are 3 product bets that I would be willing to make. The first one is deeper video and live investment. So Substack has already signaled that it's doubling down on the app as a growth engine. So video and live formats would be the natural extension, especially now that they're post Series C. I think they have fresh capital that they can reserve to expand creator tools. The second bet I'd make is a free subscription tier for articles. The platform already provides an option to gate certain articles behind a paid subscription, but I think it could be cool to explore gating certain articles behind a free subscription. Because the Substack feed pushes so many writers' content, this can encourage people to actually subscribe to writers that they enjoyed rather than just reading the article and then swiping back into the feed. And the third product bet I would make is mid-tier creator tooling and cohort products. Since the platform's real weakness is the huge gap between the top 50 earners and everyone else, I think a bet on things like structured collaboration tools, curated cross-promotion networks, or bundling for niche creator groups to help the medium writer actually break into sustainable income. Ultimately, Substack didn't invent the paid newsletter, but it turned a lonely one-off habit into a connected economy that people are actually interested in supporting. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought of this episode and what other consumer apps you guys would like to see, and I'll see you guys in episode 4.